Revolutionary War, April 19, 1775 to September 3, 1783. Women during this time period took on many roles ranging from traditional to unconventional. Traditional roles were nurses, cooks, and maids. The unconventional side consisted of secret soldiers and spies. These group of women were also referred to as the Daughters of Liberty. The Daughters of Liberty were a formal female association initially formed after the Townshend Acts in 1768. They organized and participated in boycotts such as that of tea, and they also helped manufacture goods when shortages were emerged. The first president of the United States, George Washington's wife, Martha Washington, and Abigail Adams, the wife of John Adams, the second president of the United States, have been identified as noble members of the Daughters of Liberty. They supported the war efforts by serving and recruiting other women as nurses during the war. They also helped with the retrieval of supplies for soldiers and participated in the manufacturing of ammunition. Though women were not allowed to serve in the war, many disguised themselves as men, enlisting and using fake names in hopes of not being discovered. One woman by the name of Deborah Sampson, a notable member of the Daughters of Liberty, served as a member in the Continental Army under the alias Robert Shirtliff. Her identity was later discovered by a doctor after becoming injured. She was later granted a pension for her service to her country. Many women helped with the war efforts, and some were even compensated for their service. However, many failed to receive the equality they desired and the respect they deserved. Samuel Adams, a prominent revolutionary leader, was reported for saying, "With ladies on our side, we can make every Tory tremble." The Daughters of Liberty did not only protest the purchase of British goods, such as tea, but they also sought to establish equality for women. The Daughters of Liberty are originally referred to as cheerleaders for the Sons of Liberty. They were not truly given credit for their deeds for the revolution, for many of their actions occurred in the background. In the beginning, the group of women were not always referred to as the Daughters of Liberty. Some newspapers referred to them as the Daughters of Industry or Noble-Hearted Nymphs. Long before the American Revolutionary War, there were chapters forming across New England in hopes of becoming independent of British tyranny. One example of this was their initiative to create their own cloth in order to establish independence of British textile manufacturers.
Women during the Industrial Revolution between 1760 and 1830. The impact of the Industrial Revolution resulted in women entering the workforce in textile mills and coal mines. Women entered the workforce in order to help support the family. However, once in the workplace, they faced discrimination and poor treatment. Women earned less than half of what men earned and worked from 8 a.m. to 11 p.m. in the winter and 6 a.m. to 12 a.m. in the summer. This led to labor unions evolving. So the prop that I brought in is a pincushion, which represents women working in the textile industry during the Industrial Revolution. They endured long hours, which led to hazardous working conditions. For instance, they pricked their fingers because this job required delicate handwork, and only women could fulfill this work instead of men. It took a significant amount of time for women to receive their right to vote because 1, there were disagreements on whether women should take part of politics or not. 2, the government was focused on issues such as the oncoming war and troubles with the trade union instead of having social reforms for women. And 3, it was against the social norm to give women power. The suffrages were the starting grounds for women's rights and movements of today. Women at the time were both socially and legally inferior to men, meaning women did not have suffrage or the right to vote in political elections because it was assumed that a woman's husband would deal with political matters. Because of this, women soon came to the conclusion that they wanted to have more educational, economical, and political opportunities. The first feminist movements emerged out of this time period and sought equality, especially in terms of voting rights. This movement for equality and voting rights is often referred to as the suffrage movement, and the women who fought for equal voting rights are referred to as suffragettes. Today, the feminist movement continues as women fight for equal pay, maternity rights, and more.
I'm going to be talking about women's rights during World War I today. It occurred in July of 1914 to November of 1915. Women were hired for many more jobs than before World War I because when men went off to war, a lot of jobs were hiring because of the lack of men. So women filled in for men as long as they were at war. Women worked in transportation, construction, and war production. Doing transportation, women were bus conductors, ticket collectors, porters, which were people who carried the luggage, and bus drivers. And actually during World War I, railroad jobs for women went from 9,000 women to 50,000 women, so it's a very big increase. For war production, this was actually the dangerous of all. During the World War I for women's jobs because they worked long hours. It was very dangerous, and they had to work around TNT, which is an explosive. It was very well paid, but the downside was TNT caused a lot of explosions, killing many women, and actually created a disease called jaundice that's potentially fatal. And to the right of the PowerPoint, you can actually see them using this very well kept machine to deal with TNT because it was very, very dangerous. In the wartime, though, it was not a lot of people were accepting of women's jobs. The Navy and Marines were, and they accepted 13,000 women into active duty. They served in clerical positions with the same rank as men, and they were given identical pay of $28.75. But in the Army, it was a little more strict, and they only allowed nurses to enlist. The women were not given military rank, and they were given unequal pay. So there was still a little gap between men and women. For the long hours working in munition factories, they were told to have leisure time to improve their health and well-being, which created this idea of a ladies' football team, which was sadly soon banned in 1921. I put a picture on the slide of the football team that the women working in the munitions factories created. I think it's actually very hilarious, but also very cool to show their empowerment during the World War I and how much confidence they had. More women were filling in for men, but this led to more families in need of daycares. So that was the issue, but women also stepped in for that, but it just created this big problem of what to do with my kids when men are at war and the wives are working in the factories and with transportation. And I brought in a prop, and you'll see that in the later video, but they were called patriotic dressing dolls, and they were produced and sold to celebrate the roles of women during World War I. There was a Miss Patriot, Glory on the Parade, Miss Liberty, and a Red Cross nurse. There were these cutouts, and I'll explain it later, but it would just provide a lot of support for the women while they were challenging themselves and going above and beyond for their work field. In World War I, this was one of the patriotic dressing dolls that they used. They would cut this out and put this on their doll to show support for the women. This is a Red Cross nurse cutout of a patriotic dressing doll, and it just showed their nationalism and support in women pursuing these roles. I chose scrubs as my prop for World War I because nurses during World War I were a big deal, and I actually learned in my microbiology class and my history class that Florence Nightingale was an awesome nurse. She actually discovered that gunshots weren't actually killing the soldiers, and it was actually the wound that was getting infected. She actually started saving a lot of lives because she figured out that in order to keep the men alive, she would have to clean her tools that she tried to heal them with. The infections were causing their death instead of the bullet wounds themselves. And this was a big step towards fighting in the war because it really helped them get back on their feet. There were a lot of people that didn't believe her at first, and they didn't take this discovery to the next level, but it's really appreciative, and it's awesome to look back at a woman figuring this out for herself and saving a lot of lives in the process. I mean, think about it. If we didn't have nurses today, we wouldn't be able to survive, and they've discovered a lot of antibiotics for themselves. And just during the war itself, it's very important to be able to stitch up these wounds and get them back on the fighting fields, or else they're definitely going to lose the war. So I don't think a lot of people give light to the nurses because they think that the soldiers have to work so hard for what they do, and that is true, but also nurses are there when the soldiers fall, and they allow the soldiers to get back up and start again. I think that's really awesome, and as a nursing major, that really pushes me towards my goals, and I'm excited to let the class learn about how big of thing nurses were in the World War I and how much they helped out.
My part of the project was women during the Holocaust. So World War II started when Germany invaded Poland in 1939. And while Germany was occupying Poland, they kind of separated like the Jews from the rest of the population. So there was a lot of torture that came with that. And they brought a lot of their torture on the men at first, but then as the Holocaust went on and World War II went on, it came to the women. So the women endured a lot of like sexual harassment, and so that was along the lines of they would have to clean the streets of the ghetto in their underwear, or they would have to be forced to strip down in front of like men that they didn't know, and they would be inappropriately touched. And a lot of their the sexual harassment occurred in front of their husbands, their fathers, their sons. So our project was basically about the rights of women, but during the Holocaust, women didn't have that many rights. So it just goes to show how much women have come throughout the time. This is a prop that I bought for my project. So this is like a little cardigan, and I brought this to represent the clothes that were stripped from them. And so the Jewish people in the Holocaust and the concentration camps had to wear just a single uniform so they could be identified and kind of taken away from like it takes away their individuality. So then I also have my shoes. And so it also goes to show that they didn't have shoes. They kind of just walked around barefoot. And so it really makes me appreciate the clothes that I have today, because they are like my individual style. Like, I just like to be comfortable. And so I'm able to choose my own style as an American today. So it makes me really grateful.
Now we're going to talk about the relationship between women's rights in today's societies versus what they once were. Women are slowly rising in the industry of owning small and medium-sized businesses. There is estimated to be between 8 and 10 million women owning their own businesses today. Even though these numbers are still much smaller than those of men owning similar enterprises, women's numbers are rising. In addition, there are also many more women in formal paid work today than at any point in history. Women now make up about 40% of the global formal labor force and 43% of the agricultural
labor force. Previously, in 2010, women in the Middle East only made up 21% of the formal labor market. Next, we can appreciate that large numbers of women have entered the professions, the trades, and businesses of every kind. More than 3 million women now work in occupations considered non-traditional until very recently, including the clergy, newsroom, and military. Additionally, women are being elected to public office at all levels of government. The picture on the slide indicates the rise of the involvement women have had in the work cohort. You can see that the lighter shade is portraying the year of 1976, in which every age group had less than 50% participation in the work cohort. On the other hand, in the year of 1994, you can see that almost 70% of the women are participating in cohorts. There are many women that have made a mark on history, but I'm going to point out a few in particular. Nancy Pelosi became the first female Speaker of the House in 2007, a role she has now returned to since 2019. Pelosi's feat came nearly a century after Jeanette Pickering Rankin, the first woman to serve in Congress. Following Sandra Day O'Connor was Sonia Sotomayor and Elaine Kagan, both nominated by President Barack Obama. Madeleine Albright became the first female U.S. Secretary of State in 1997. Hillary Clinton became the first woman to be nominated by a major party for president in 2016. The first woman to run for president was Victoria Woodhull in 1872. This slide is an example of what posters would have looked like in the Me Too movement. The Me Too movement has allowed women to feel comfortable to be able to speak out about the gray zone. These gray zone stories have prompted equally important conversations about sexual consent, sexual assault, and how we understand the interplay between the two. Many women privately and publicly have found the language to speak out about it through the Me Too movement.
Like I mentioned in my slide, the Me Too movement was the time where women felt comfortable to speak out. The prop I chose are examples of posters that were commonly found at protests. The first one indicates a bunch of people's hands of different races and backgrounds. These hands could mean a number of different things, but one statistic that stood out to me is that more than 1/3 of women who were reported being raped before age 18 also experienced rape as an adult. The other poster that I chose reads that men of quality respect women's equality. This poster basically explains that even though women are severely mistreated and taken advantage of by men, there are many men that also do respect women's morals and values.
Only 7 of 150 elected heads of state in the world are women, and only 11 of 192 heads of government. Women are less likely to be in representative positions. This is a problem seen both at the national government and local government levels. The glass ceiling effect is a pervasive resistance to the efforts of women and minorities to reach the top ranks of management in major corporations. Of the 500 largest corporations in the U.S., only 23 have a female chief executive officer. That is just 4.6%. An International Labor Organization study of 83 countries found that women earn 10 to 30% less than men. Even in the U.S. in 2010, women working full-time still earned only 77% of the male wage. Overall, one can see that even though women have made tremendous progress from where they once stood, we are still facing significant amounts of discrimination and institutional barriers. The picture on the slide shows that in 2006, women were making $6K compared to what men were making, which was $11K. As you can see, in 2015, women were then making $11K, the same amount that men had made in 2006. However, men were then making $21K, $10K more than what women were making. After measuring the pace of change for the past decade at current rates, it would take the world another 118 years, or until 2133, to close the economic gap entirely. In the 10 years, the Forum has been reporting on the gap between men and women in health, education, economic opportunity, and political representation. The gap has only narrowed by 4% overall. Some will argue that education is the reasoning for the wide gap. However, more women than men are now enrolled in universities in the majority of countries covered by the Global Gender Gap Report, but men still outnumber women in skilled jobs. A record 102 women will serve in the incoming House of Representatives, comprising 23.4% of the chamber's voting members.